Ah, shit. Here we go again.
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of Square Enix is unreliable and untrustworthy. Final Fantasy XV took over a third of my life to go from reveal to launch, and when it came out, it was a mess of conflicting design choices, broken promises, and dishonest marketing. However, for some strange reason, I'm cursed with this affliction to be excited by every new Final Fantasy game and play it no matter how shitty it might be. I don't know, I guess I'm just too far in at this point. I don't want Final Fantasy XVI to suck, because otherwise I'll be stuck playing a shitty game for dozens of hours of my life. So I'm compiling a list of the 10 things Square Enix and Final Fantasy XVI must do to regain my confidence in the franchise. Let's begin. Number 1. Launch a complete game. Final Fantasy XV felt like an empty husk where many of its parts had been stripped and repurposed to add back in as paid DLC months and even years down the line. Square cannot repeat this. If it's in the trailer, it should be in the game. If it's critical to the story, then it should be in the game. Final Fantasy XVI must be first and foremost an offline experience. Do not make it a platform for future monetization. Number 2. Thoughtful combat. Final Fantasy has trended towards more action game combat over traditional turn-based games in recent years, and I have no problem with that. However, the combat, no matter what form it takes, must require forethought, strategy, and tactical thinking. Final Fantasy XV's combat was pretty brainless. You could just spam attacks carelessly and face no real repercussions. Final Fantasy VII, on the other hand, didn't have that issue, and it featured arguably my favorite combat in the series. This, plus Square hiring Devil May Cry 5's combat designer to aid with Final Fantasy XVI's combat, makes me optimistic about this aspect. 3. Quality over quantity. Don't make an open world if it comes at the cost of the pacing, quality of quests, and quality of story. If the game must be physically smaller to facilitate its story and plot better, then that's the route it should take. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a smaller game in scale to 15, and it benefited immensely because it was way more focused. If anything, return to your laurels and construct a world that is an interconnected web of zones, like Final Fantasy XII or Final Fantasy XIV. Number 4. Depth over spectacle. Enemies don't need to be the size of mountains, especially if they are worse for the overall enjoyability of the combat. Design every enemy with it playing to the strengths of the combat and gameplay experience. Final Fantasy XV had these gigantic enemies and bosses that looked super cool, but were oftentimes the most boring and frustrating enemies to fight. In contrast, the Dragoon fight in Final Fantasy XV is commonly revered as the best fight in the game, and it just involved a clash between humans. This doesn't mean don't have spectacle, but use it in a controlled manner. 5. Share the spotlight. The characters are the heart of every Final Fantasy game. When the game is over, it's the characters and their struggles that stick with us. Final Fantasy XV had some pretty interesting characters, but it also had so many characters that felt underutilized and sidelined. Characters like Cora and Luna appeared in so much marketing material and supplementary media, but then only appeared for all of 5 minutes in the game. A lot of these side characters never got their moment to shine and complete their arcs. Final Fantasy lives and dies by its characters, and 16 cannot repeat these mistakes. Number 6. Modernized level design. This is an issue I have with many JRPGs, not just Final Fantasy. So many JRPGs have such outdated level design where the dungeons just end up being a collection of copy-pasted hallways. Oftentimes the only thing that you do in a JRPG dungeon is walk and fight. JRPGs should diversify their gameplay loops. Experiment with platforming, puzzles, and complex level construction. Number 7. Make actions more robust. This point kind of piggybacks off the last point, as it's an extension of the common problem in JRPG design, where every spell or action in JRPGs is implemented in a very restrictive and limited way. Let me give you an example, as it may give light to the point I'm making. The teleport in Final Fantasy XV was the most exciting aspect of Noctis' design in my opinion, but I was so turned off by how restricted I was in its uses. It's truly a shame that in an open world game with a teleporting protagonist, I could not aim my teleport manually and explore the world by reaching far off places. That's because it was implemented only as a combat tool instead of a more broad tool that the player could use as they please. Final Fantasy XVI should use the agility and freeform spellcasting shown in the trailer to allow the player to do more than just fight in a flashy manner. Use it to boost exploration and world interactions. Number 8. No 30-hour tutorials. I don't need to mention which game in the series inspired this point, but I think this is a problem found in many modern JRPGs. The game shouldn't be giving tutorials or holding the player's hand after a handful of hours. So many JRPGs have an issue with not trusting the player to figure things out. Players aren't babies. Respect their intelligence. Number 9. Commit to the darker tone. Continuing with the players aren't babies statement, don't use dark themes to be superficially more edgy. If you're gonna go down the darker route, then do it properly and treat the topics with the respect and attention they demand. Don't half-step it, and don't be overly expository. Sometimes more complex topics require an increased degree of subtlety. Number 10. Don't make us wait forever. Release within a reasonable amount of time since announcement. Don't make players wait several years for a game if you want them to hold realistic expectations. Square is probably the worst in the industry when it comes to revealing games way before they are ready to be shown, and oftentimes, this is the main reason people end up feeling burned by their games. Square should try to launch games within 18 months of revealing them, and that means Final Fantasy XVI should be out by the end of next year or Q1 2022 at the latest. So that was my list. Overall, from what we've seen and what we know so far, there have been a few things that make me feel optimistic. Yoshi P and Business Division 3 are probably the most consistent crew at Square Enix in recent years, so I think that's a good sign. Also, there's been a ton of complaints about the graphics in Final Fantasy XVI's trailer, but honestly, I think that helped to bring this reveal down to earth. This doesn't seem like yet another stitched together concept with 0% actual footage and a release date at the end of the next generation of consoles. In fact, I'm fairly certain this game will probably be cross-gen on PS4 and PS5. Anyways, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think down below on your thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI and the current state of Square Enix. And remember to leave a like and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.